believe you have a few discussion points to start us off here.
Yeah, and there's one that's not listed, and I thought about it earlier today. I figured I'd start by asking exactly what marriage itself is. Now, when I say marriage, I'm not talking about defining or redefining marriage, okay? The whole marriage between a man and a woman or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is, where did marriage originate? Let me ask you this. Was marriage originally a religious institution that the government got involved in, or was it originally a government institution that religion got involved in? What do you think?
I don't know the precise history of marriage. If I were to hazard a guess, I probably would say it has a lot to do with wealth distribution and politics. Bonding together of one family to another family. For instance, you have the whole concept of the dowry, and in some traditions, the whole Romeo and Juliet, where you have the two warring families. Alliances were built using marriages in the medieval ages. I think that marriages, for the longest time, probably had very little to do with love and a whole lot more to do with finance.
Well, I would agree with that. Anybody that's seen a movie having to do with the old times, I don't know if you've seen the movie. Have you seen the movie Belle?
Bill?
Have you seen that movie?
No.
Belle, B-E-L-L-E?
Belle.
Yeah, Belle.
No.
Really, really great movie, and it has a lot to do with that. But anybody that's seen those kind of movies knows that there definitely was back then an advantage into marrying into certain families, increasing your wealth or increasing your power. I would propose, and this is my personal belief. I was kind of hoping that you just kind of agree. We could start off with an agreement.
That's the way it always works with apologetics.
Yeah, I know, but that marriage was originally a religious institution, and somehow the government got involved in it. Now, I've looked into this a great deal over the course of the Supreme Court decision. I mean, it's been a big deal here, so I've looked into it a good bit, and I found that there's two main reasons that the government got involved in marriage. One is to regulate procreation. That is to say that there was a time where the government wanted certain people to breed with certain people. They made marriage a legal contract, and they would not allow, say for instance, a black man and a white woman to marry and have children. So they would regulate procreation by way of issuing marriage licenses to who they deemed worthy of, not really worthy, but they had certain reasons that they wanted families to breed, and that's one of the reasons that the government got involved in issuing marriage license. And the second reason is exactly what you said. If government was not involved in marriage, a man and a woman could get married by the church, but it wasn't legally married. Therefore, if something happened and the man dies, who does all of his possessions belong to? Well, since there's not a legal record of him and his wife being married, then it becomes a big fight. Does it go to his mother? Does it go to his children and whatnot? So the second reason that I found that government got involved with marriage is in order to decipher or declare who gets what in an instance of death, or when it comes to inheritances. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, I like to add that if you read the Quran, you'll find that there's a large portion of it, I can't remember which book, which outlines just that, who inherits what when a woman is widowed, for instance. In that context, I think that the Quran, Islam, in some of these cultures, is the government, more or less.
Yes, definitely Islamic countries. I've heard different definitions between the difference between a Muslim country and an Islamic country, but that's besides the point. But a lot of Islamic countries still, they try to rule by a theocracy. Their religion is ingrained into every aspect of politics. Now, here in the West, especially in the United States, the way our Constitution was drafted, it guarantees that will never happen. So that's definitely a cultural issue. But yeah, you're right. The Islamic states. I don't want to get it confused with ISIS, but the Islamic states or governments definitely try to set up a theocracy in which the religion is ingrained into every aspect of the culture.
I will agree that there probably always has been some religious component to marriage, as there was a religious component to nearly everything throughout history. In the past, people didn't get married. I'd say more likely people got married off. it was maybe church condoned, or you had to get the blessing of some religious organization.
Yeah.
Certainly that could be a component as things have progressed and as people get married civil union. For instance, my wife and I got a civil union because there would be no Catholic church that would marry us. Then once you have that, you no longer require the blessing of any sort of church. Same-sex marriage sort of flows naturally.
Okay, can you, just for anybody that may not know, what's the difference between a marriage and a civil union?
In Quebec, okay, well, maybe I should back up, because I was using that word civil union, and I actually not sure if I 100% know the difference. In Quebec, you can get married at the city hall. Well, that's not true even. You can get married in a church, but it's a ceremony. The actual legally binding marriage, as far as the state is concerned, is when the papers are signed, when the marriage license, what have you, is signed. This can happen in the church, or it can happen as with us at City Hall.
Okay, yeah, it's the same thing here. Exact same thing. There legally is no difference between a pastor signing your marriage license or certificate and a judge doing it.
So here in Quebec, as far as the state is concerned, the churches, for instance, are concerned about whether a marriage is valid or not as per their religion or their interpretation of what God considers a valid marriage, right? That's fine. Let them do that. Let them decide that. But when it comes to the state, I see it as being a different criteria.
Okay. Well, I haven't really made it to the talking points yet, but in Canada, how does a same-sex couple go about getting married? Is it by way of civil unions?
Yes, you can definitely do that. Basically, in Canada, you have same-sex marriage, and it's my understanding that there's no difference legally in a same-sex marriage from any other legal marriage. All the privileges of regular marriage were extended to same-sex couples. I'm pretty sure you could probably have church services as well.
Okay, and we have that here. You know, we have certain PCUSA, which is the Presbyterian Church of USA, has affirmed that concept and left it up to the individual church to decide. Some Methodist churches would be willing to do that, and there's different denominations affirm same-sex marriage and are willing to do that. So we have churches here too that are willing to perform same-sex marriage. So it's basically the same. Okay. The first point is, okay, are you familiar with the case in Oregon about the cake baker?
Oh my goodness, the whole planet is aware of that case.
Okay, all right. I wasn't sure. It's huge here. I wasn't sure if I guess you're right, yeah. Basically, the Kleins, Melissa Klein, and I've got it right here somewhere. Aaron and Melissa Klein, they refused to make a lesbian couple a wedding cake. Because of that, they were sued in a civil suit. They lost their bakery and had to pay, I don't have that here, but I think $135,000 fine or something like that. So do you think a business should be shut down for refusing service for religious beliefs?
It's a little tricky. You can easily point to, and I'm sure you know I'm going to go here, to the civil rights era, where you had businesses that were refusing services to Black people. That you had the lunch counter, the lunch counter sit-in that occurred, I can't remember where exactly. There is my understanding that there's even something in the Constitution down there which prevents people from denying service to protected classes. So the question is it equivalent to say that someone who is Black should be served versus someone who is gay or lesbian? Now, you can go two ways. You could say that, these two things are different, or you could go completely libertarian, if you want to call it that, and you could say, hey, I think that everybody should have the right to refuse business of anybody else for any particular reason at all.
Yeah, I would disagree with that. I don't believe that anybody should have the right to discriminate because of race, because of gender, because of even sexual orientation. I don't think that it's right to refuse service to a homosexual, whether they be, gay, lesbian, bisexual, whatever. I don't think you should be allowed under law to refuse service on that basis. I think that's wrong. However, in this particular case, they weren't refused service because they were homosexual. In fact, the couple that had came in were actually regular customers at this particular bakery. They were refused service because they asked for a wedding cake to be a part of a wedding ceremony that the owners of the company disagreed with religiously. So it was a religious belief. Okay, which one trumps, the civil rights of same-sex couples or religious beliefs? You know, a lot of people try to put those two together and try to decide which one's most important. I don't think that it's a fair parallel. They weren't being refused because they were homosexual. They were being refused because what they were asking violated the rights of the owners of the shop. Does that make sense?
So what you're saying is the person going to get the cake, the people going to get the cake, could very well have been a straight couple who are merely going to get the cake to bring to the ceremony. So it's merely the ceremony itself which the owners have a problem with.
The ceremony, well, the marriage itself. You know, the marriage itself violates the religious beliefs.
The marriage itself.
So even if it would have been held in a courthouse and the couple went and said, hey, we're getting married in a courthouse, we're not getting married in a church, but we are getting married, it's still a violation of the religious belief.
I mean, I see where you're coming from. I wasn't aware of that particular twist to the story.
Yeah.
I would have to think it over.
Okay.
I'm trying to find some parallel. Let's say you have, again, a cake shop and someone comes in and they want to have a cake baked for their niece's bat mitzvah, for instance. And the owner said, I don't agree with Judaism, so I'm not going to bake your cake for you. Would you see that as being the same thing?
I think so. I mean, if it was, say it was an atheist shop owner, and he says, listen, even though atheism is technically, linguistically, the absence of religion. However, the atheist does not believe in religion. So to ask him to participate in a religious ceremony by baking a cake for it, I think that's a fair parallel, yeah. I would be totally for the atheist shop owner refusing service and asking him or her to go somewhere else.
I'd be interested to know what would happen if you, let's say, lived in a country where, let's say, you're a Christian minority or something living in Egypt, for instance. You happen to live in a small town, and all the shops decide that they don't want to bake you a cake. And they don't want to sell you any food. And they would prefer for you also not to live in their apartment building either.
Yeah.
You know?
Sounds like it's time to move.
I'm just trying to bring it, because another problem, I guess, with this case is it comes off as being ridiculous that everybody's talking about a cake. The cake is something fundamentally, it's a cake. So, but if you were to take the principle of it and you were to say, okay, what if this were not a cake? What if this were medical help? Let's say you happen to be an ambulance driver. I don't want to try and point it back to the people, because you've drawn a parallel towards the actual the background there, the religion. So, but there are some parallels you could make. You could have a pharmacist who refuses to dispense birth control for religious purposes. In small towns, if you're one of the only pharmacists in the town and you decide that you're not going to dispense birth control because of religious persuasion, these girls are forced to go elsewhere. They're forced to find a way to get their pills somewhere else.
Would you agree it's a religious freedom issue? It's not about the cake per se, but it's a religious freedom issue.
You can look at it one of two ways. You can look at it as a religious freedom issue, and you can also look at it as maybe a discrimination issue. You're denying service to a particular class of people. Let's say, for instance, you're in your religion, you believe that, well actually let's back up and say you have a religious problem with people who are getting married, same-sex couples who are getting married. I guess is that, would you consider that to be different than, let's say, a mixed race marriage? Because back in the civil rights era, you would probably run into several Christians, I suppose, who would say, well, I don't even know how they do it, but would say it is not right.
Yeah.
These two things, how would you see them as being different?
I have heard that argument come up a few times. I would say that the main difference between the interracial marriage and same-sex couples is one explicitly violates the Christian belief. That is to say, it explicitly violates what the Bible teaches, and the other does not. In our culture today, do two people who are different races have the right to get married? Yeah, they do. And also in our culture today, two people have the right, a same-sex couple has the right to get married, has the right to be together in whatever kind of relationship they see fit. So in both cases, they have the right to do it. Like I said, the main difference is that when it comes to, and I'm speaking from the Christian faith, and I know that most religions hold essentially the same view on this, or at least the three Abrahamic religions do. Homosexuality is explicitly forbidden in the Bible. Interracial relations is not explicitly forbidden, particularly in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, there are some prohibitions to the Hebrews mixing with non-Hebrews or non-Israelites. But in the New Testament, there's not really anything said to the matter.
Personally, I think that in another 20 years, same-sex marriage will be more or less completely normalized in the U.S. In Canada, I think it's 2005 in Canada. It just happened, and other than I think the Phelps family putting up a nasty website, I certainly don't recall any massive consternation up here. It's been like that, and it's becoming normalized. Really, though, aren't you still just refusing service to people? I mean, you're refusing service to people who bought the cake or are buying the cake, who need the cake. You've got people who need a cake. You can make cakes. You don't need to agree with what's on the cake. You could also, I don't know if this was offered or not, but you could also make the cake and say, here's a cake, do with it as you please as well. I don't know. I don't know the details. A blank cake. Yeah, I don't know the details, but you could say, I'm not gonna write on the cake or whatever, but here is a cake upon which you can place your two grooms or your two brides, right? I don't know where that is in the spectrum. I don't think I was paying much attention. Personally, my point of view is that there's nothing wrong with same-sex marriage, and that these bakeries who refuse to serve these people for whatever reason, or by proxy or what have you, they deserve to go out of business. That's my theory. That's my point of view. Now, that said, I guess I would have to leave it with the courts to decide. If it were Sean McGuire running the world, I suppose I would almost let the free market decide. I would be, okay, if you guys don't want to serve these particular people, then write it on the outside of the building. We don't serve these people. I say that now because I feel as if public opinion has swayed to the point where if you're a business and you put that on your door, you could lose significant clients. Maybe not. Like, maybe depending on where you are, you'll be the most amazing. It might draw in more clients. Maybe it's because I'm on the northeastern coast, right, where it's different up here, right?
But there's a mischaracterization there, because they didn't refuse to serve a certain type of people. That's. But
isn't it the same thing? They
refused. No, I mean, these people, like I said, they were regular customers, this couple. They had bought cakes there before. They were not refusing to serve a homosexual couple. They were refusing to do a service that would conflict with their religious belief. So to say that, you should put a sign up that says that we don't serve, homosexuals, that wouldn't be, that's a mischaracterization of, it wouldn't be true. It's a mischaracterization of their point of view. Now, I think it's wrong. It would be absolutely wrong for the clients to refuse to serve someone because they were homosexual. I think that's wrong. I think it's morally wrong and ethically wrong. And it should be legally wrong. In fact, under Oregon state law, it is wrong. But they weren't refusing to do a service because they were homosexual. It was a religious issue.
Would you say that maybe a healthy middle ground between both points of view would be that they would bake the cake, but they would simply not put any kind of gay decorations on the cake, and they would say, okay, we'll put flowers, we'll put this stuff, but we were not going to put wonderful wedding Janice and Mary or something on it, and then say, okay, you'll have to find another way to put the message on this.
That would be a fair compromise, I think, if the shop owners were willing to do it. I would be in favor more than anything to steal the military's use of terms as a don't ask, don't tell. If you want a 3-layer cake, come in and ask for a 3-layer cake, and don't tell me what it's for, and I'll make it, and then you can decorate it however you want. I think that would be absolutely fair. And like I said, it would be up to the shop owner. I personally would not have a problem with the Kleins being willing to make a wedding cake for a same-sex couple. That's according to their own convictions of what they believe that their religion actually says. That is, if they were willing to do it, then that's their own business. But because they believe that the Bible is explicit that same-sex couples or homosexuality is a sin, then it should be according to their personal convictions and beliefs.
This seems to be a pretty good point to pause that discussion for this episode. We're probably going to continue this in the next episode. For now, though, I'd like to play a side conversation Tony and I had about the cosmological argument. Let's end this off with a little apologetics here. We'll do a little cosmological argument because I know Tony likes the cosmological argument. So I'll be the obstinate atheist, and he can attempt to sway me with his skills.
Okay. You want me to lay out the Kalam cosmological argument real quick?
Let's just start out with the first point because I'm sure I'll have problems with that.
Okay. Well, let me lay out the whole thing, and then we'll start with the first point, just so the listeners can know where we're going with it. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Premise 1 says that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Therefore, the conclusion, therefore, the universe had a cause. And that's the cosmological argument in a nutshell. So premise 1, I guess we can start with that. Everything that begins to exist has a cause.
So, what do you mean by begins to exist? What is this begins business? This begins business is tricky.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot, but I don't know.
Why not just say?
Why
not just say everything that exists has a cause? Why do you put this begins in?
Because if everything that exists has a cause, then what you end up with is an infinite regress, and which is a logical and a philosophical and a scientific impossibility. In other words, an infinite regress is when you don't have a starting point, you go on into infinity. In other words, if you don't have an initial first cause, then what you end up having is a regress or an infinite amount of causes, which is, like I said, just logically incoherent.
So I guess I have a hard time even seeing that. Let's go back. If you have something that begins to exist, and everything that begins to exist must have a cause. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So, and when you say exists, does that mean okay, so what are we talking about when we say exists? So are we talking about physically, or are we talking about some sort of symbol or form? What are we talking about?
Just about anything, or pretty much anything. Anything physical. You could even say metaphysical, like thoughts. If a thought began to exist, then something had to lead to that thought. But you could not think to infinitum. Now, that's kind of getting off subject, but to keep it simple, anything that begins to exist. Now, when I say begins to exist, what I mean is comes into being. In other words, at some point it did not exist, and then at some point it does exist. So anything that did not exist but now does exist had to have had a beginning, is the first premise. And then the second premise is, if it did have a beginning, then something had to have caused it to come into being.
Let's say we have the concept of 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. Those things probably never began to exist. Is that what you're... Can we just throw that out?
Well, numbers are abstract objects. So an abstract object, some people consider, in fact, most, if not all mathematicians, consider numbers to be transcendent. They transcend space and time and energy. They're actually beyond our universe. They're just concepts that we've captured and know about. In other words, in no possible... Well, I don't know if that's true, so I'm not going to say that. But to say that the number 4 began to exist, I don't think that would be necessarily true. In fact, I don't think it's true at all, but that would get us into the teleological argument. And,
let's keep
that's
things
a
simple.
whole other argument. Yeah.
Let's not discuss Greek. Okay, I guess it's possible that everything requires a cause. However, I've read, and I'm not a quantum physicist, so I don't know enough about this to be an expert, but I've read that there are...
Not either. I just quote quantum physicists.
I've read that there are, in fact, particles which pop into existence with no apparent cause. I guess what this brings me to is that it's a pretty sweeping generalization. It's a pretty bold rule to make about the entire existence and history of the entire universe.
Yeah, let's qualify what you just said. Okay, protons, and I think electrons, if I'm not mistaken, seemingly pop into being spontaneously without a cause. That's what you've heard, right?
Yeah. I believe it was Hawkins who mentioned it around the edge of the event horizon of a black hole or something, which already is so out there that I don't understand it.
Okay, now this happens in a quantum vacuum. You cannot have protons popping in and out of existence spontaneously without a quantum vacuum. Therefore, it must be deduced that the quantum vacuum itself is the cause of the spontaneous coming into and going out of being.
You got me there. I'll tell.
I've run into this objection a lot. I've looked into it.
Look, I mean, this argument, point number 1, is already making a generalization about the entire existence, everything, that nobody's qualified to make. How do you know that this is the case? It's just a logical assumption.
Well, I wouldn't say it's an assumption. All of the evidence that we have so far, scientifically and philosophically, all of the evidence shows that everything that we can observe, or everything that we know of, and anything that can be deduced mathematically, like the beginning of the universe, has come into being by some sort of cause. And we have no evidence whatsoever of anything that has ever come into being without a cause. So if you want to just weigh the evidence, both philosophically and scientifically, all of the evidence points to the first premise being true, and there's no evidence that we know of to falsify it. Now, it is a falsifiable claim that everything that begins to exist has a cause. You've got to find something that began to exist without any sort of a cause. And it's not something that we found.
Well, the problem with trying to falsify that is that you simply might not have found the cause. When do you stop and say there is no cause here? How can you do that? How can you say...
I don't think you can.
I mean, how can you do that? How can you say, oh, I don't know what the cause is for this, therefore there is no cause. Okay, but let's move on a bit. The second premise is...
The second premise is the universe began to exist.
Definitely the universe as we know it now has begun. I mean, there was quite a bit of change that occurred there. So, yes, that's fine. The universe began. Universe.
I mean, if the first premise is true and that everything that begins to exist had to have had a cause, and the second premise that the universe had a beginning, which you seem to agree with, you seem to be hung up on the first premise, but you seem to agree with the second premise, the universe had a beginning. Then the conclusion necessarily follows that the universe had to have had an initial first cause.
The universe had to have a first cause. I mean, now the question is, what is this first cause? So, I mean, Could it have been another universe? Could it have been the same universe imploding, exploding over and over again? Who knows, right? Could there be many, many, many universes? Again, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, you're right. You're right. There's, there's string theories. There's all different kinds of theories that would give our particular universe a cause apart from any kind of divine being. Say the multiverse hypothesis. The multiverse hypothesis says that our universe was born out of a larger, greater universe. If that be the case, that's fine. But all that does is it pushes the cosmological argument back a step. If that be the case, that's fine. Let's say the multiverse. I don't agree with the multiverse hypothesis, but let's say that that is true and it gets proven to be true. Well, then the cosmological argument just simply changes the wording in premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the multiverse began to exist. Therefore, the conclusion necessarily follows that the multiverse had a initial first cause. See, it just pushes it back a step. So what the cosmological argument tries to get to, or not necessarily the cosmological argument itself, but the ones who advocate for it, is there had to have been an initial first cause to, whether it be our universe or the multiverse before it, there had to have been an initial first cause.
What if the multiverse never began?
It always was. Okay, in an eternal universe, the latest, I want to figure out how to phrase this. The latest, or probably the best theory that we have right now, is the Guth-Borde-Vilenkin theorem. Alexander Vilenkin has talked about, and of course William Lane Craig has talked about, and many atheists have tried to use Vilenkin's words to say that no, that's not what he was actually trying to say. But Alexander Vilenkin actually states very clearly there is no way to get around a cosmic beginning, whether it be just our universe or a multiverse or what have you, that according to his theorem or their theorem, cosmologists are going to have to face the reality of a cosmic beginning.
Yeah, okay. That's a statement. I mean, for me, if you were to say that you have a universe or a multiverse, what have you, that's been around forever, or is, I don't know, that is outside of our universe's space-time, right? Mm-hmm. Transcendent. Mm-hmm. For me, that means more. It has more concrete meaning than to say that some intelligent being happens to have, be outside of our universe's space-time and has had no beginning. So you can call it God or you can call it the multiverse, right?
Yeah.
For me, the multiverse makes more sense because I would see it as being a collection of universes. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
It makes less sense for me because I would see that as being necessary. Mm-hmm. I do not see it as being necessary to have a being with, I guess it doesn't have a brain, an immaterial being that is intelligent somehow, which is throw in all kinds of criteria that we don't really probably understand as humans, right? Mm-hmm. Into this mix. And it seems more ridiculous to me to try and posit all that than just to say, why not simply have a multiverse that simply has been around forever. But even so, I wouldn't even need to go there because all we have is a few seconds after a large explosion. We don't have anything before that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. At some point, you have the Big Bang, which I'll accept the Big Bang. I don't have an issue with it at all. But at some point, you have the Big Bang that spawned everything into existence. But let me ask you, would you agree that everything physical had to have had a cause?
I would say that everything that I'm aware of that's physical, like matter, we'll put it that way, is a result of events which have occurred over some time. When you reach the quantum level, my understanding of the quantum level, things are very different. But generalized in our much larger, the macro level, I mean, that's where regular physics kicks in.
But I mean, if you've got a multiverse, then that's on the macro level, as you say, right?
I'm not really sure what level that would be on. That would perhaps be on some completely different level, some parallel level, some different dimension level.
Yeah. What I'm saying is if everything that is physical, all matter, has a cause, then even if you do posit a multiverse for causing our smaller universe, you still got to explain where the physicality of that multiverse came from. In other words, at some point there was no matter. At some point there was nothing, and then we have something. People like Lawrence Krauss in his book A Universe from Nothing tried to redefine what nothing is and actually define it as something. But when we say nothing, when anybody says nothing, what they should mean, I would think, is no thing, no being, just nothing. There was nothing. At some point there was nothing, and then there was something. And when we say nothing, we mean no matter, no empty space, no time, no nothing. There was nothing. And then at some point we have something.
When you use the word nothing that way, it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, it doesn't point to anything that means really anything at all to me. Let's say the multiverse here, where we're talking about, which is outside of our, or parallel to our universe, right? Or somewhere in relation. I mean, it might as well be nothing too. Just like God, my understanding of God seems to be immaterial. I'm being told that it's immaterial. Well, I don't see that as being any different than nothing either. If you're telling me that it's immaterial and exists outside of our space and outside of our time, then I'm sorry, there's nothing there. It's the same. I mean, it's not here. And if you're saying it's immaterial, then is it anywhere? I don't know. How can we have this conversation?
So what you're saying is only the physical exists. The metaphysical does not exist.
Here's the thing: when I was religious, I thought that the metaphysical existed. The supernatural's not right. The metaphysical, what's beyond our realm. Let's put it that way, right? But I never really was able to get a handle on what I was talking about. We exist in this space. There's matter, there's energy. We have thoughts, but these thoughts seem to be what brains do. They seem to be... Thoughts don't exist on their own. They're not floating around the ether. They just don't exist on their own. They're part of the machine, or of the human being.
So you believe that we're biochemical machines, what Richard Dawkins says?
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right. So I'm not going to get into the moral argument. That's actually my favorite argument.
One thing. I think that I know that our listeners, if there are any left, are probably going to be eager to continue the argument. But maybe we could cut it off there, because I noticed that we were going to branch off into something completely different with...
I'm trying not to. It's really tough because everything seems, ends up interconnected.
You've got like soul-body duality or whatever you want to call it. I know that we want to go there, but let's not. Let's save it for another discussion. So I think that'll be good for our first take at the cosmological argument. It really seems to me like we're almost talking different languages. So what seems infinitely reasonable to Tony is just ridiculous to me, and I'm pretty sure that Tony probably has a similar point of view. I just can't see it. Would you say so?
To be fair, we weren't really prepared to have this conversation. We just kind of winged that thing. But yeah, you're right. Once a conversation can progress no more, then it's time to shut it down and maybe regroup and come to it again.
So, I'd like to thank you for coming back for episode 2. And
thank you. I think this is great. I think this podcast is extremely enjoyable. I liked it a whole lot.